Skip dinner. I'm eating alone anyway. 6 words that landed in the space between us like shattered glass. He didn't even look back, just grabbed his jacket from the hook, checked his phone, and walked out at 7 in the evening while steam was still rising from the chicken I'd spent an hour roasting. The door clicked shut, the lock turned, and I stood there in our apartment, 2 plates on the counter, 2 forks, 2 napkins folded the way my mother taught me, and the sudden understanding that I'd been eating alone for months. I just hadn't admitted it yet. That was the moment something inside me cracked open. Not with anger, but with a clarity so sharp it felt like waking up from surgery. How long had I been cooking for a ghost? How many times had I set a place for someone who'd already left? And why was I still standing here, waiting for him to come home? Before we go any further into what happened next, I need to know something. Have you ever loved someone so much that you erased yourself to make room for them? Left a comment below telling me where you're listening from? And if you've ever felt invisible in your own home? Hit that subscribe button because what I'm about to tell you gets darker before it gets better. And you won't believe where this ends up. My name is Callista, not the kind of name people forget, which makes it worse that he did. I'm 31, a medical transcriptionist who works from home, which means I spend my days listening to doctors describe surgeries and injuries and illnesses while typing faster than most people can think. It's solitary work, precise work, the kind of work where you learn to hear what people aren't saying in the pauses between their words. That skill would matter later, though I didn't know it then. I'm the person who remembers birthdays, who keeps plants alive, who responds to texts within 5 minutes. My apartment before him was small but mine. Houseplants on every surface, books stacked in careful towers, a kitchen where I'd experiment with recipes on Saturday mornings. I thought I knew who I was. Then I met him, and I started reshaping myself to fit into the spaces he'd allow. His name was Brennan. We met 2 years and 4 months before that Thursday, reaching for the same bunch of bananas at the grocery store on a Sunday morning. Both of us in sweatpants, both of us half awake. He laughed first, this easy sound that made me feel like I'd known him longer than 3 seconds, and said, "Great minds shop for potassium together." It was a stupid joke. I laughed anyway. We got coffee at the place next door, talked for 2 hours about nothing important, and 3 months later I was helping him move his boxes into my apartment because his lease was up and it seemed natural. It seemed right. He was a project manager at a tech company. The kind of job that sounds important, but nobody really understands what it means. He'd come home and tell me about his team, about deadlines, about his boss who expected too much, and I'd listen while we cooked dinner together. He'd chop onions and tell stories. I'd stir the pan and ask questions. It felt like building something. The late nights started so gradually, I didn't notice the pattern until I was drowning in it. First, it was once a week. Big presentation tomorrow. Have to stay late to prep. Then twice a week. Then 3 times. By month 4, he was coming home after 10 most nights. Sometimes after midnight. And I'd already eaten. Already cleaned up. Already spent 3 hours wondering if I should text him or if that made me needy. I started leaving plates for him in the fridge, wrapped carefully. Little notes tucked underneath. Missed you tonight. This tastes better. Reheated in the oven, not the microwave. Hope your meeting went okay. He'd eat them the next morning, standing at the counter in his boxers, scrolling through his phone with one hand and forking food into his mouth with the other. He never mentioned the notes. After a while, I stopped writing them because shouting into silence doesn't make you heard. It just makes you hoarse. Month 6, I stopped leaving his portion. I'd cook for myself, eat at the counter, standing up because sitting at the table alone felt too much like admitting something, and I'd throw away the leftovers. Looking at food meant for 2, when you're always one, does something to your chest that feels like drowning in air. He never asked why I stopped cooking for him, Just started ordering delivery on his way home, eating it straight from the containers while watching something on his laptop. We'd be in the same room, him on the couch, me in the chair, and the space between us felt wider than the apartment. His cologne started smelling different on those late nights. Not stronger. Different. Like it had mixed with someone else's perfume in a small space for a long time. I found receipts in his jacket pockets when I was hanging them up. Restaurants I'd never been, to, across town. On nights he'd texted me about eating vending machine snacks at the office. Once, a smudge of lipstick on his collar. This deep red I'd never owned because it didn't suit my skin tone. I held the shirt in my hands in the laundry room, staring at that mark, and almost said something at breakfast the next morning. The words were right there. Where did this come from? But I didn't ask. Because what if I was wrong? What if I was the paranoid girlfriend who couldn't handle a partner with a demanding job? What if love meant giving space, being understanding, swallowing down the questions that kept me awake at 3 a.m? So I swallowed them. All of them, and something inside me went rigid and numb, like a joint that freezes after you've held it in the same position too long. I stopped cooking entirely by month 9. Stopped grocery shopping. The pantry emptied out slowly. The fridge held condiments and wilted lettuce and not much else. When he'd come home at midnight asking what there was to eat, I'd look up from my book and shrug. I ate already. Check what's there. He'd stand in front of the open fridge, illuminated by that harsh white light, and sigh like I'd disappointed him. Then he'd pull out his phone and order something. We stopped talking. Not in a dramatic blow-up way. Just a slow fade. Like a song turning down so gradually you don't notice it's gone until you're sitting in silence. One Tuesday, I came home early from a doctor's appointment. Nothing serious. Just a regular checkup. But they'd fit me in at noon. And I was back by 2, instead of my usual 5. His phone was on the counter. He'd left in a rush that morning, late for some meeting, and forgotten it. It sat there between the coffee maker and the fruit bowl we never used anymore. It buzzed. I watched it buzz. Told myself not to look. Looked anyway. The preview on the lock screen said, "Can't wait for tonight. Making your favorite. That pasta you love. Plus the wine. From last time." The contact name was just a letter. J. My hands didn't shake. I felt weirdly calm, like I was watching myself from outside my body. Some other version of me in some other life, looking at proof of what I'd known for months but couldn't admit. I put the phone back exactly where it was. Went to my computer. Started working. Typed out a doctor's notes about a woman who'd broken her wrist and hadn't realized it for 3 days because she'd thought the pain was normal. Because sometimes we're so used to hurting, we forget what it feels like not to. That night, while he was out, I made a list. Not of what I'd do to him, of what I needed to do for myself. Call the landlord. We were month to month on the lease because we'd never gotten around to signing something longer. Find a new place. Something small. Just mine. Start moving my things slowly so he wouldn't notice. Figure out who I was before I met him. Before I started cooking dinners for someone who was eating at someone else's place. The list was 7 items long. I looked at it for an hour. Then I added an 8th item. Make sure he understands what he did. Not in an angry way. In a way that would stay with him. In a way that would make him feel the weight of all those empty chairs. Finding a place took 3 weeks of searching. I'd look at listings during work. Between typing up medical reports, scheduling viewings during my lunch breaks. I found a studio apartment 20 minutes across town. Nothing special, but the kitchen had a big window that let in morning light. And when I walked through it the first time, I felt something loosen in my chest. The lease was in only my name. I signed it in the property manager's office on a Thursday afternoon and cried in my car afterward. Not sad crying, but the kind of crying that happens when you finally set down something heavy you've been carrying so long, you forgot you were holding it. The move-in date was 6 weeks out. That gave me time. I started, moving things slowly. A box of books, while he was at one of his late nights. My winter coats from the back of the closet. Photos of my family. I realized we barely had any photos together. And the ones we did have, I didn't want. My grandmother's quilt that I'd kept folded at the foot of our bed. Each trip to the storage unit I'd rented felt like stealing pieces of myself back from a place I'd left them for safekeeping. Not realizing I'd been locked out. He never noticed. That was the part that hurt most. Not that I was leaving. That I could dismantle my entire life from our apartment, and he was so checked out he didn't see it happening. I didn't want revenge in the way people think of it. I didn't want to scream or break things or post about it online for strangers to judge. I wanted something simpler and more permanent. I wanted him to feel what I'd felt. Not the anger, the absence, the slow realization that someone you thought would always be there had already gone, and you'd been too distracted to notice until it was too late. So I wrote him a letter. Rewrote it 11 times over 2 weeks. The first versions were full of words I'd never say out loud, the kind that feel good to write but don't actually mean anything. The middle versions were sad, pleading almost, asking him to explain why I wasn't enough. The final version was just honest. Brutally, quietly honest. I told him about the dinners, every single one. About standing at the counter eating microwaved leftovers while listening for his key in the lock. How that sound used to mean comfort, and eventually meant dread. About the cologne that smelled wrong and the receipts I'd found and that lipstick mark I'd scrubbed out of his collar while pretending I hadn't seen it. About the text message from Jay. About how I'd known for months but couldn't prove it, so I'd convinced myself I was inventing problems because I was insecure or damaged or too much. I told him that I'd thought love meant understanding, but understanding had turned into erasing myself. That I'd shrunk down so small trying to fit into whatever space he'd leave for me that I'd forgotten I used to take up room. That I'd laughed loud and had opinions and didn't apologize for existing. But the part I spent the most time on, the part I rewrote 7 times alone, was this. You made me complicit in my own disappearance. That's what I can't forgive. Not that you found someone else. Not even that you lied. But that you made me sit at a table set for 2. Eating alone, while you were somewhere else being fed. You made me believe that was normal, that was love. You made me think I was asking too much by wanting you to come home for dinner. And I believed you. That's the part that haunts me. Not what you did, that I let you convince me it was reasonable. The letter was 3 pages, handwritten because typing it felt too distant. I folded it into thirds and left it on the kitchen counter of our apartment on a Friday morning. The first Friday of my move-in week at the new place. I'd spent 6 weeks moving everything out so gradually he hadn't noticed. My books, my clothes, my dishes, the quilt, the plants I'd kept alive for 3 years, the framed photo of my parents. Every single thing that was mine, I'd taken back. What was left in the apartment was his furniture, his dishes, his life that I'd been a temporary guest in without realizing it. The space looked bigger, empty, cleaner, more honest than it had been in months. I'd paid my half of rent through the end of the month, left a note for the landlord that I was off the lease as of that day, put my keys on the counter next to the letter. The last thing I almost took was a photo stuck to the fridge with a magnet from the aquarium we'd visited once. Us at that grocery store, the day we met, both holding bananas and laughing. Some friend had taken it as a joke. I stood there looking at it for 5 full minutes, that photo of 2 people who didn't exist anymore. Then I took it down, walked to the dumpster outside, and threw it away. It felt like the most honest thing I'd done in 2 years. He called 47 times that first weekend. I know because I counted before I blocked him. The texts came faster than the calls. I read the first 3. We need to talk about this. You're overreacting. Let me explain. Callista. Come on, this is crazy. I blocked his number after that. There was nothing to talk about. Nothing to explain. I already understood everything I needed to. A mutual friend, someone who worked with him, called me on Sunday night. "He's losing it," she said. Came into the office, looking like he hadn't slept, asking if anyone had heard from you. I asked if Jay was still in the picture. Long pause. He says that wasn't what I thought. That she's just a friend. I laughed. Not a bitter laugh. Just a tired one. "Tell him I hope they're happy," I said. Genuinely. I hope he fits with her better than he did with me. The friend seemed confused by that. People expect rage. Rage is easier to understand than exhaustion. 2 weeks later, the same friend called again. "Jay left him," she said. She didn't know about you. Thought he lived alone. When she found out, she ended it. There was a pause, like she was waiting for me to feel vindicated or satisfied. I didn't feel anything except a distant sympathy for Jay, who'd probably been eating dinners with someone who was checking his phone for texts from someone else. "That's rough," I said. "And I meant it." The friend pushed. "Don't you want to know what he said? He's been asking about you." I looked around my studio apartment, my plants on the windowsill, my books unpacked and arranged by subject, my kitchen where I'd made stir-fry the night before and eaten it slowly, tasting every bite, not rushing through it to clean up before he got home. "No," I said. "I really don't." Living alone was strange at first. Not bad strange, just unfamiliar. I'd wake up and forget for a second that I didn't have to be quiet, that I could turn on lights and make coffee and play music without worrying about disturbing someone. I started cooking again. Nothing complicated. Pasta with vegetables, rice bowls, soup that I'd eat for 3 days. Sometimes I'd invite my friend Poetry over, this woman I'd met in a transcription forum online who lived 10 minutes away. We'd met for coffee once during the early days with Brennan and stayed in touch, though I'd canceled on her more times than I could count when he'd said he might be home early. She never made me feel guilty about that. When I told her I'd left, all she said was, "Good. I was wondering when you'd remember who you were." Poetry came over on a Wednesday night, 3 weeks after I'd moved. I made too much pasta because I was still learning to cook for one, and we sat on my floor because I only had one chair. "He's been asking mutual friends about you," she said. I twirled pasta around my fork. "I know." She watched me. "You're not curious?" I thought about it. Really thought about it. I spent 2 years being curious about where he was, what he was doing, who he was with. I'm done being curious about him. She smiled. "There's the Callista I met 3 years ago. That hit me harder than it should have. I'd forgotten that person existed. Month 2 in the studio. I started noticing things about myself I'd forgotten. I liked mornings. I'd wake up at 6 and make elaborate breakfasts just because I could. Eggs with vegetables, toast with real butter. Coffee I'd actually sit and drink instead of gulping down between tasks. I liked quiet. Not the tense quiet of waiting for someone to come home, but the peaceful quiet of being the only person you have to consider. I liked making plans and not having to check with anyone first. I went to a museum on a Saturday afternoon because I wanted to. Stayed for 3 hours. Didn't text anyone about it. Just existed in a space and let myself enjoy it. But I also started noticing things about the world I'd stopped seeing, like how many women I'd see at restaurants, sitting alone with a book or their phone, eating slowly, and how I used to think they looked lonely. Now I wondered if they looked free. How many couples I'd see where one person was talking and the other was nodding but clearly not listening. And I'd think about all those dinners where Brennan would tell me about his day, and I'd realize later he'd never once asked about mine. How many people stayed in relationships because leaving felt harder than staying, even when staying meant disappearing a little more each day. 4 months in, my neighbor started leaving notes on my door. Just friendly things. "Saw you like plants. I'm giving some away if you want them. Made too much soup. Left some in a container by your door." Her name was Soline. She was 72 and had lived in the building for 30 years. We started having tea on Thursday afternoons. She'd been married once, she told me. He was a good man, she said. But good isn't the same as right. I spent 15 years trying to make it work, before I realized I was trying to fit into a shape I wasn't built for. I asked how long she'd been alone. She looked at me over her tea. I've been solo for 30 years. I've never been alone. That distinction lived in my head for weeks. 6 months in, Brennan stopped trying to contact me. The mutual friends stopped mentioning him. It was like he'd decided I'd stopped existing, the same way I'd stopped existing to him long before I left. I wondered sometimes if he'd told new people about me. If I was a story he told at gatherings. My ex-girlfriend who left a letter and disappeared. I wondered if he'd learned anything, if Jay leaving him had made him examine his patterns. But mostly I didn't wonder. Mostly I made dinner and read books and went to work and remembered what it felt like to be a whole person instead of half of something that wasn't working. But there was something I hadn't told anyone. Not poetry. Not Soline. Not the mutual friend who still checked in sometimes. When I'd written that letter, when I'd moved everything out, when I'd left those keys on the counter, I'd done one more thing. Something small, something that wouldn't matter for months, maybe longer. Something I'd set in motion that last week before I left, when he was at one of his late nights and I was packing the last of my things. I'd found something 3 days before I signed the lease on my studio. Not while snooping. While doing laundry. His work laptop was open on the couch because he'd fallen asleep there the night before. Came home at 2 in the morning and didn't even make it to bed. The screen was still on. I walked past it carrying a basket of clean clothes and saw an email chain. Just the subject line visible. Promotion Committee. Final candidates. His name was on the list. So was someone else's. Someone named Jay. Full name Jordana. They were both being considered for senior project manager. The position came with a raise, a relocation assistance package, and according to the email preview, final interviews scheduled for next quarter. I stood there holding that laundry basket, reading what I could see without touching anything. The promotion was huge. The kind that changes your salary bracket. The kind people spend years working toward. And Brennan was competing against the woman he was sleeping with. The email chain had threads about managing team dynamics and potential conflicts of interest and maintaining professional boundaries during evaluation period. I set the laundry down. Read it again. Something clicked into place, this understanding that spread through me like cold water. He wasn't just cheating. He was risking everything for someone who was his direct competition. Or maybe that was the point. Maybe getting close to her was strategic. Maybe the late nights weren't just about wanting someone else. Maybe they were about winning. I didn't touch his laptop, didn't screenshot anything. Just filed that information away in the part of my brain where I kept track of details that mattered. The part I used at work, listening to medical recordings, catching the things doctors said between the words. I went back to folding laundry. He woke up an hour later, saw me putting away clothes, and said, "Morning," without looking up from his phone. I said, "Morning," back. We were so polite, like roommates who'd never learned each other's last names. That information about the promotion sat in my head for 3 weeks while I planned my exit. I didn't know what to do with it. Wasn't sure it mattered. But then one night, after I'd already rented the storage unit, but before I'd started moving things, he came home at 11 and actually sat down next to me. Didn't say anything at first. Just sat there while I pretended to read. Finally, he spoke. "I might be traveling more for work soon. There's a promotion coming up. Could mean relocating for a few months during a transition period." I kept my eyes on my book. "Where to?" He shrugged. "Not sure yet. Depends on the team structure. But it's a big opportunity." I asked the question I already knew the answer to. "When do you find out?" He checked his phone. Always checking his phone. Few months. Committee makes decisions in January. This was October. I'd be gone by mid-November. He didn't know that yet. I looked at him. Really looked at him. And tried to remember what I'd seen 2 years ago that made me think this would work. He was attractive in a generic way, the kind of person who looked put together in photos but forgettable in person. Brown hair he kept slightly too long. A gym membership he used twice a week. Clothes that fit well because he'd had a girlfriend who cared about things like that and bought him sweaters that actually matched his skin tone. I'd been that girlfriend. I'd cared so much, and he'd let me care while giving nothing back except excuses and leftovers of his attention. That's great, I said. Because what else do you say when someone tells you about a future you won't be part of? He nodded, stood up, went to the kitchen. I heard him opening the fridge, closing it, opening cabinets. There's nothing to eat, he called out. There hadn't been anything to eat for weeks. I didn't answer. He ordered delivery. We went back to being strangers, sharing space. But that conversation gave me something. It gave me a timeline. January. The promotion committee would decide in January. I'd be gone by then. Settled into my studio. Moved on with my life. And he'd still be competing against Jordana, who wouldn't know that the person she was sleeping with was also trying to beat her for a position that could define both their careers. Unless someone told her. Unless she found out before the committee made their decision. Unless the secret he was keeping from both of us became the thing that destroyed what he wanted most. I'm not proud of what I did next. But I'm not ashamed either. I created an anonymous email address. Took me 20 minutes to set up, using a coffee shop's Wi-Fi instead of our home internet, using details that couldn't be traced back to me. I didn't send anything yet. Just had it ready, like a match I was holding but hadn't struck. I told myself I might not use it. That leaving would be enough. But I also knew that leaving wouldn't teach him anything. He'd tell himself a story about how I couldn't handle his success. How I was too needy, too demanding, too small for his big life. He'd make himself the victim, and he'd do the same thing to the next person, and the person after that. Because people don't change when they get away with things. They only change when they face what they've done. Moving out took longer than I'd planned. Not because I had that much stuff, but because I was careful, methodical. I'd take a box to the storage unit, come back, rearrange what was left so the empty spaces weren't obvious. I'd remove books from the shelf but spread out the remaining ones. Take half my clothes but leave enough that the closet still looked full if you didn't count. It was like erasing myself in reverse. Like I'd never fully moved in, just borrowed space temporarily, and was now returning it to its original state. He never noticed. That should have hurt. But it didn't. It just confirmed what I already knew. I'd been invisible for so long that my disappearance was just more of the same. The Thursday before I planned to leave, Brennan came home at 8. Early for him. I was packing books into a box in the bedroom, but I'd heard his key and shoved the box under the bed before he came in. He found me sitting on the edge of the mattress, looking at my phone. "Hey," he said. Something in his voice was different. Uncertain. I looked up. "Hey." He sat down next to me, close enough that I could smell his cologne. The regular kind. Not the wrong kind. Which meant he'd come straight from the office. Which was so rare I couldn't remember the last time it happened. "We should talk," he said. My heart didn't race. I just felt tired. "About what?" He ran his hand through his hair, this gesture he did when he was uncomfortable. "About us. I feel like we've been disconnected lately. Like it was a recent development. Like the last 18 months hadn't been me watching him drift away in slow motion." I asked, "What do you mean?" Make him say it. Make him admit he'd noticed. He sighed. "I don't know. I've been working a lot. And you've seemed distant, like you're pulling away. I almost laughed. Almost. I've seemed distant? He nodded. Earnest. Like he genuinely believed what he was saying. Yeah. Like you don't want to spend time together anymore. You stopped cooking. You're always busy when I get home. I let that sit between us. Then I said, when you get home at midnight? He looked defensive. I told you, it's work. This promotion is important. I stood up. Needed to not be sitting next to him. Right. Work. He stood too. What does that mean? I turned to face him. This man I'd loved. This man I'd erased myself for. This man who was standing in our bedroom accusing me of being distant while he'd been eating dinner at another woman's apartment for months. I could have said it all then. Could have asked about Jordana, about the late nights, about the text I'd seen. But what would that accomplish? He'd deny it or minimize it, or find a way to make it my fault for not understanding his needs. So instead I said, nothing. I'm tired. He softened, reached for my hand. I let him take it. His palm was warm, familiar. I felt nothing. Maybe we could do something this weekend, he said. Just us. Go somewhere. Reconnect. I looked at our joined hands. Maybe, I said, knowing I'd be gone by this weekend, knowing this was probably the last conversation we'd ever have. He kissed my forehead, went to take a shower. I pulled the box out from under the bed and kept packing. Friday morning, I called in sick to work, told them I had food poisoning, spent the day moving the last of my things, the big stuff I'd already gotten out. This was the final sweep. My bathroom products, the books under the bed, the photos from the drawer in the kitchen where I kept recipes, my grandmother's quilt I'd mentioned earlier. I folded it carefully, put it in a bag by itself. It was the last thing my grandmother made before she died, this patchwork of fabrics from clothes I'd worn as a child. I'd brought it to the apartment 3 months after moving in with Brennan. It had lived on our bed for almost 2 years. He'd never once asked about it. Never noticed the repair I'd done on one corner where the stitching came loose. Never understood that it was the most valuable thing I owned. Not in money, but in memory. I left the letter on the counter at noon. Left my keys beside it. Stood in the empty apartment one last time. It looked bigger without my things. Colder. Honest. I took a photo with my phone. Not of anything specific. Just the living room with the couch and the chair and the blank walls where my art had been. I don't know why I took it. Maybe to remember what leaving looked like. Maybe to prove to myself later that I'd actually done it. I sent one text to the landlord, letting him know I'd removed myself from the lease and wouldn't be renewing. Then I left, pulled the door shut behind me, walked to my car, drove to my studio apartment where all my boxes were waiting to be unpacked. And I didn't look back. That night, alone in my new place, sitting on the floor surrounded by boxes, I opened that anonymous email address I'd created. Typed out a message. Rewrote it 4 times. The final version was short. Jordana, you deserve to know the truth about who you're competing with for the senior project manager position. Brennan has been in a relationship for over 2 years. His girlfriend just left him because she found out about you. He lied to both of you. The promotion committee should know that the person they're considering has been maintaining inappropriate relationships that directly conflict with company policy about fraternization between competing candidates. Check his phone records from the last 6 months. Check restaurant receipts. Ask him where he was having dinner all those late nights. Someone who lies this easily about his personal life won't hesitate to lie about his professional one. I read it 3 times. Hovered over the send button. Didn't press it. Not yet. I wanted to wait. Wanted to see if leaving would be enough. Wanted to give myself time to decide if I was someone who did this kind of thing. If you've made it this far, I need to know you're still with me. Drop a comment telling me what you would have done. Would you have sent it? Would you have just walked away? Hit subscribe because the ending of this isn't what you think, and you need to hear how this actually played out. Because what happened next, nobody saw coming. Not him, not Jordana, not even me.